For 7 years, I sent my son-in-law $40,000 every January because I believed my daughter was dead. Then one warm afternoon at the park, my 7-year-old granddaughter leaned close and whispered something that made my heart stop. "Grandma, please stop sending him money." Children don't whisper warnings unless they're afraid. And in that moment, something inside me shifted in a way I couldn't explain. Like the ground beneath my life had quietly started to crack. For a long time I had believed I understood grief. I thought I knew what it meant to lose a child, to wake up every morning with a weight in your chest that never fully lifts. I thought I knew what it meant to keep going anyway because someone still needed you. But I didn't understand that grief can blind you. That love can make you trust the wrong people without ever realizing it. That afternoon at Riverside Park was supposed to be like every other Saturday we'd shared for years. Just the two of us, sitting on our usual bench under the old oak tree while she ate strawberry ice cream and told me about school. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting soft shadows that moved gently across the grass. Somewhere nearby, children laughed, and a dog barked happily, the ordinary sounds of a peaceful day. She kicked her light-up sneakers against the bench, tiny flashes of pink lighting up with every swing of her feet. "Grandma," she said again, quieter this time, her small fingers wrapping tightly around my sleeve. "Just watch him, okay?" A chill ran through me despite the warm air. "Watch who, sweetheart?" She glanced toward the playground, then back at me, her eyes wide with a seriousness no child should carry. "Daddy." I felt my chest tighten. "Why would I need to watch your dad?" She shook her head quickly like she was scared she'd already said too much. "I can't say. Just please." Then she slipped off the bench and ran toward the swings, leaving me sitting there with melting ice cream in my hand and a question that wouldn't let go. For the rest of the afternoon, I watched her play, trying to convince myself I was overthinking. Children imagine things. They misunderstand adult conversations. They worry about things that aren't real. But every time she glanced toward the parking lot, every time her smile faded just a little too quickly, the knot in my stomach tightened. That uneasy feeling followed me all the way home. The house felt quiet when I stepped inside. The kind of quiet that settles deep into the walls after too many losses. I set my purse on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, wishing I could still hear my husband's voice drifting in from the living room like I used to. It had been 7 years since we buried our daughter. 6 months after that, I buried my husband too. The doctors said it was his heart, but I knew the truth. Some hearts don't survive losing a child. I moved slowly into the living room, my eyes drifting toward the mantel where the urn sat exactly where it always had. For years, I had passed it every day without really looking, like it was too painful to fully acknowledge. "Please stop sending him money." Her words echoed in my mind, louder now in the silence of the house. I tried to push the feeling away, busying myself with small tasks. Rinsing a coffee mug, sorting through mail I had already read, wiping a spotless counter. But the unease stayed, like a quiet voice whispering that something wasn't right. That night sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while memories drifted through my mind. The phone call 7 years ago, the funeral, the closed casket, the way my husband held my hand so tightly I thought it might break. Then the years that followed. The routine of sending money. The brief thank you text. The distance I had convinced myself was just grief expressed differently. Had I missed something? Had I been too trusting? Morning arrived slowly, pale light slipping through the curtains. I moved through my routine: coffee, toast, the morning news murmuring. But everything felt slightly off, like the world had shifted just a little while I wasn't paying attention. By mid-morning, I found myself driving toward my son-in-law's house without fully deciding to go. His home sat at the end of a quiet street, with white siding, black shutters, a lawn that always looked like it needed mowing just a little sooner than it got it. I had helped with the down payment years ago, back when it felt like helping build a future for my granddaughter. I parked along the curb and sat there for a moment, watching the front door, unsure what I expected to see. Finally, I walked up the path and knocked. He opened the door after a few seconds, surprise flickering across his face before settling into something neutral. "Oh hey," he said. "Everything okay?" "Just thought I'd stop by," I replied gently. "See how you and Emma are doing." He stepped aside to let me in, but the smile never quite reached his eyes. The house smelled faintly of air freshener and something else I couldn't place. The living room looked tidy, almost too tidy, like a place meant to look nice rather than feel lived in. My granddaughter sat at the dining table with crayons spread out in front of her. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, a real smile this time, but it faded quickly when her father walked past without saying a word. "Go finish your homework," he said absently, scrolling through his phone. Something about the way she lowered her head made my chest ache. We made small talk in the kitchen, weather, work, nothing meaningful, but now that I was listening for it, I couldn't ignore the distance in his voice. Before I left, he said casually, "Hey, any chance you could send next year's money a little early? Got some expenses coming up." The words landed heavier than they ever had before. It was September. I forced a polite nod. "I'll think about it." Driving home, the unease grew sharper, my granddaughter's whisper replaying over and over. "Just watch him." That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down. A stack of bank statements spread in front of me. 7 years of transfers. 7 years of trust written in neat rows of numbers. $40,000. Every year. I traced the lines with my finger, memories surfacing. The brief messages, the lack of details, the quiet distance I had ignored because I believed it was normal. Why had I never asked more questions? Why had I assumed everything was fine? The house felt colder than usual. I looked toward the living room where the urn sat on the mantel, catching the faint glow of the lamp beside it. For 7 years I had believed I understood my life, the loss, the routine, the quiet acceptance. But sitting there surrounded by paper and silence, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. And doubt has a way of opening doors you didn't even know existed. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, my granddaughter's voice echoing once more in the quiet house. "Please stop sending him money." That was the moment I realized something didn't just feel wrong. It was wrong. And deep down, I had a feeling that whatever truth waited ahead was going to change everything I thought I knew about the last 7 years of my life. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. That children sometimes say strange things. That fear can live in small misunderstandings. That I was letting old grief cloud my judgment. But the unease refused to leave. It followed me through my morning routines, through quiet afternoons in the house that still felt too big, through evenings when the silence seemed louder than usual. Everywhere I went, my granddaughter's whisper echoed like a question I couldn't answer. "Just watch him." By Tuesday morning, I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. If something was wrong, I needed to know. Not just for me, for her. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside me, and began pulling out 7 years of bank statements from the drawer where I kept old paperwork. The stack grew thicker than I expected. Each page a quiet record of trust one had never questioned. January after January, the same amount stared back at me. $40,000. 7 transfers. $280,000. Seeing it written out like that made something tighten in my chest. I had always known the number, of course. I had signed every transfer. But seeing the pattern laid out in neat rows made it feel different. Real in a way it never had before. I flipped through the pages slowly, remembering the reasons I had told myself each year. For my granddaughter's school. For her future. For stability after losing her mother. Family takes care of family. That's what I had believed. But as I kept reading, something else became clear. There were no receipts. No updates. No explanations beyond short text messages. "Got it, thanks. Appreciate it." Simple words that suddenly felt far too small for the amount of trust behind them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the uncomfortable question forming in my mind. Why had I never asked for more? Later that afternoon, I found myself driving past his house without meaning to. The street looked quiet as always, the late summer sun casting long shadows across the lawns. I slowed slightly as I passed, glancing toward the driveway. That's when I noticed a silver sedan I didn't recognize parked near the curb. Maybe it belonged to a neighbor, I told myself. Maybe it was nothing. But something about it lingered in my mind long after I drove away. The next morning, I decided to stop by the grocery store early before the usual rush. Harper Market had been part of my life for decades, the familiar smell of coffee and fresh bread always grounding me in a way nothing else could. Routine has a way of making you feel safe, even when your thoughts are anything but. I was standing near the register sorting receipts when the bell above the door chimed softly. A woman walked in. Mid-30s maybe. Dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. She moved with quiet confidence, like someone who knew exactly where she was going. She went straight to the coffee aisle. I watched without really meaning to, something about her presence tugging at my attention in a way I couldn't explain. She picked up a bag of ground coffee, then a small jar of cinnamon, and headed to the counter. "That's all for you?" I asked politely. "Yes," she said, her voice calm but distant. She handed me a $20 bill without meeting my eyes. I gave her the change and she turned to leave. It should have been a normal interaction, completely forgettable. But as she walked past, a strange feeling settled over me, the unsettling sense that I should recognize her, though I couldn't place why. "Ma'am," I almost called out, but the words caught in my throat. The bell chimed again as she left. I stood there staring at the door for a moment longer than necessary, trying to shake the feeling. 20 minutes later, I stepped outside to bring in the sidewalk sign. That's when I saw her again. She stood across the street beside the same silver sedan I had noticed the day before. And she wasn't alone. My son-in-law stood beside her. They were talking casually, close enough that it felt familiar. Then she touched his arm lightly and he laughed, a relaxed laugh I hadn't heard from him in years. My stomach dropped. I stood frozen, the sign still in my hands, watching as she got into the driver's seat, and he walked around to the passenger side before the car pulled away. The unease that had been building inside me turned sharp and cold. Who was she? Why hadn't he mentioned her? And why did it feel like I had just seen something I wasn't supposed to see? That evening, the house felt heavier than usual. Shadows stretched long across the living room as the sun dipped below the horizon, and I found myself pacing slowly between the kitchen and the window, replaying the scene over and over. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he had a friend. But my granddaughter's whisper wouldn't let me dismiss it. Just watch him. By morning I knew I needed help. Roger Stevens had been a family friend for nearly 40 years. A retired detective with a way of listening that made you feel like every detail mattered. I called him just after 9. "Everything okay?" he asked immediately, his voice warm but alert. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "I think I need your advice." He arrived at the house within half an hour, carrying that same calm presence he always had. We sat at the kitchen table and I told him everything, the warning at the park, the money, the woman at the store, seeing them together. He listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes in a small notebook he pulled from his pocket. When I finished, he leaned back slightly, studying me with thoughtful eyes. "You trust your instincts?" he asked. "I always have," I said quietly. "Then we start by paying attention," he replied. Over the next few days we did exactly that. We drove past the house at different times. Not too obvious, just casual enough to observe. The silver sedan appeared again twice. Each time she stayed for hours. Each time he never mentioned her when I spoke to him. Suspicion slowly hardened into certainty. Something wasn't right. One evening after Roger left, I found myself standing in the living room staring at the urn on the mantel. The soft glow from the lamp reflected faintly off its surface, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange pull toward it. 7 years. 7 years of believing my daughter rested inside that small brass container. My chest tightened as an unfamiliar thought crossed my mind. What if everything I believed wasn't true? The idea felt absurd. Impossible. And yet I couldn't ignore it. Slowly, I walked across the room and picked it up, surprised by how heavy it felt in my hands. My heart pounded louder with every step back to the kitchen table. "Don't be ridiculous," I whispered to myself. "You're just tired." But my fingers were already twisting the lid. Came loose easier than I expected. Inside was a clear plastic bag filled with dark powder. For a moment I just stared, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then I untied the bag. The smell hit me instantly. Coffee. Not ash. Coffee. My hands began to shake as I sifted the powder between my fingers, noticing small reddish flecks mixed throughout. Cinnamon. The room seemed to tilt around me as the realization crashed down. For 7 years I had mourned my daughter. For 7 years, I had believed her ashes sat on my mantel. But what lay on my kitchen table wasn't my child. It was coffee grounds and spice. And in that moment I understood something terrifying. If the urn was fake, then what really happened 7 years ago? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark powder spread across my kitchen table, smelled the bitter scent of coffee mixed with cinnamon, and felt the weight of a realization I wasn't ready to carry. For 7 years, I had believed my daughter's ashes rested on my mantle. For 7 years, I had spoken to that urn on the hardest nights, whispering things only a mother says when the world has taken too much. And now it sat empty of meaning, a hollow symbol of a lie I didn't yet understand. The house felt different, like it no longer belonged to the life I thought I knew. Every creak of the floorboards sounded louder, every shadow sharper. By morning, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't face this alone. Roger arrived just after sunrise, still wearing his old flannel shirt and carrying the calm steadiness that had grounded me so many times over the years. When I opened the door, he took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. "Show me," he said gently. I led him to the kitchen, where the urn sat on the table beside the open plastic bag. The smell still lingered faintly in the air. He leaned closer, studying the contents carefully, then looked up at me with eyes that had seen too many hard truths. "That's not ash," he said quietly. My throat tightened. "I know." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "What does this mean?" I finally whispered. "It means we start asking different questions," he replied. The words settled heavily between us. Different questions. Questions I wasn't sure I was ready to hear the answers to. By mid-morning, we were sitting in his car parked a few houses down from my son-in-law's place. The sky hung low and gray, the kind of day that feels suspended between rain and something heavier. I watched the front door like I was waiting for a life I no longer recognized to step outside. "What exactly are we looking for?" I asked quietly. "Patterns," Roger said. "Anything that doesn't fit." We didn't have to wait long. Just after 2 in the afternoon, the silver sedan pulled into the driveway. My chest tightened. The same woman stepped out, moving with that same quiet confidence. She walked up to the door and let herself in without knocking. "She has a key," I murmured. Roger wrote something in his notebook. We watched for nearly 2 hours. When she finally came back out, he walked her to the car. They stood close, talking softly, his hand resting lightly on her waist before she drove away. The sight made something inside me twist painfully, not because of jealousy or anger, but because it confirmed something deeper. He had been living a life I knew nothing about. That evening, I took my granddaughter for ice cream like we always did. I watched her carefully, searching her face for signs I might have missed before. She seemed quieter than usual, her small hands wrapped tightly around the cone. "Sweetheart," I said gently, "why did you tell me to watch your dad?" She looked down at the ground, then back up at me with eyes far too serious for a child her age. "Because he lies," she whispered. The words hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. Before I could ask more, she shook her head quickly. "I can't say more. He gets mad." I felt a surge of protectiveness so strong it almost hurt. That night, Roger and I reviewed everything we knew. The fake urn, the money, the woman, the silence. Each piece felt like part of a puzzle, forming a picture I still couldn't fully see. The next morning, Roger suggested we follow him if he went anywhere unusual. We didn't have to wait long. Around 10, he left the house, driving toward the industrial side of town, an area filled with warehouses and quiet streets most people never had a reason to visit. Roger kept a careful distance as we followed. Eventually, he pulled into the parking lot of a large brick warehouse with narrow windows and a faded sign barely visible above the entrance. My stomach tightened. "What is this place?" I asked. "Let's find out," Roger said. We parked across the street and watched as he unlocked a side door and went inside. 45 minutes later, he came out and drove away. The building looked still and silent, but something about it felt wrong, like it was holding a secret just beneath the surface. The next day we came back. And the day after that. On the third day we saw her again, the woman from the store, walking into the same building. A cold realization began to form. Whatever was happening, it was centered here. That night I couldn't bear the waiting any longer. "I need to know," I told Roger, my voice shaking. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "But we go carefully." We parked a short distance away just after sunset, the sky deepening into shades of blue and gray. The warehouse stood quiet, a single light glowing faintly through an upper window. My heart pounded as we crossed the street. Roger tried the door. Unlocked. Inside, the air felt cold and still, the faint smell of dust and something else lingering in the darkness. We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing softly against the concrete floor. The space opened into a large room filled with stacked boxes and shadows stretching across the walls. Then I saw it. In the far corner, someone had tried to make a living space. A small bed, a folding table, a lamp casting a weak yellow glow, and photos taped to the wall above the bed. Photos of my granddaughter. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at those pictures like they were the only thing keeping her anchored to the world. When the door creaked, she looked up. For a moment, time stopped. 7 years of grief, of memories, of loss collided with the impossible reality standing in front of me. Her face was thinner, older, with shadows under her eyes, but I knew that face. A mother always knows. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. My knees felt weak as the truth slammed into me with overwhelming force. My daughter wasn't dead. She was alive. And she had been here all this time. For a moment I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just stood there staring at the face I had mourned for 7 years, trying to reconcile the daughter I had buried with the fragile woman sitting in front of me. "Mom," she said again, her voice trembling like she didn't quite believe I was real. The sound of her voice broke whatever held me frozen. I crossed the distance between us in what felt like a single heartbeat, and pulled her into my arms. She felt so thin. Too thin. Like life had slowly worn her down to something fragile and breakable. "My baby," I whispered, my voice breaking as tears spilled freely down my face. "My baby, you're alive." She clung to me like she was afraid I might disappear, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. For 7 years I had dreamed of holding her again, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality of it. The warmth of her, the sound of her breathing, the overwhelming flood of relief and grief crashing together. "I thought you were gone," I whispered. "I thought I lost you." "I'm so sorry," she cried. "I'm so sorry." We stayed like that for what felt like forever, holding on to each other like we were trying to make up for all the lost time in a single moment. But eventually, the questions I had been carrying for 7 years pushed their way forward. I pulled back slightly, holding her face in my hands. "What happened?" I asked softly. "Why are you here?" Her eyes filled with fresh tears, and she looked down at the floor like the answer was too heavy to hold. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. Roger stepped closer but kept his voice gentle. "We just want to understand." She nodded slowly, taking a shaky breath. 7 years ago," she began, her voice unsteady. "He said disappearing was the only way to protect everyone," she said quietly. "He said if people believed I was gone, no one would ask questions." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. "And you believed him?" I asked gently. "I was terrified," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." She told us how he brought her here, promising it was temporary, just until things settled down. But weeks turned into months, months into years, and every time she asked to leave, he told her it wasn't safe yet. "I thought I deserved it," she said, her voice barely audible. "I thought I ruined everything." The pain in her words cut deep. "You didn't deserve this," I said firmly, squeezing her hand. Roger exchanged a glance with me, the same realization forming between us without needing to say it aloud. "He controlled the narrative," Roger said quietly. "He kept you isolated." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He brought food, supplies, sometimes clothes. He told me you were okay. He told me Emma was growing up happy. He said this was the only way to protect her. I thought I did something terrible." My heart tightened. She explained how there had been a fight with a friend, shouting, anger, a moment of panic, and how she believed she had hurt her badly. How her husband came home and told her the situation was worse than she thought, that she could go to prison, that everything she loved would be taken away. My chest ached hearing how completely she had believed him. "Did you know I was sending him money?" I asked softly. Her head snapped up, confusion filling her eyes. "Money? What money?" "For 7 years," I said slowly. "I sent him $40,000 every January for Emma." Her face went pale. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know. Roger nodded thoughtfully, the pieces clicking into place. That explains the motive. She looked between us, her voice trembling. What do you mean? It means he had a reason to keep you hidden, Roger said. Financially. The room fell silent as the truth began to settle around us like a heavy fog. 7 years of manipulation. 7 years of lies. 7 years stolen. Tears streamed down her face. I let you believe I was gone. I let Dad. Her voice broke. I let him die thinking I was dead. I pulled her into another hug. You didn't know. You were scared. He used that. For the first time since we walked in, I saw something shift in her expression, not just grief but anger. He lied to me, she said quietly, the words carrying a strength I hadn't heard yet. He took everything from us. Roger nodded slowly. And now we prove it. She looked at him, confusion flickering. How? We get him to tell the truth, Roger said. The plan unfolded slowly, carefully, each step designed to make sure she was safe. She would confront him while wearing a recording device. Let him believe she still trusted him. Let him explain, justify, confess. It was risky, but it was the only way. Are you sure you can do this? I asked gently, searching her face. She wiped her tears and nodded, her jaw tightening with determination. He took 7 years from me, she said. I'm not letting him take anything else. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Roger contacted a detective he trusted. Equipment was arranged. Every detail is planned carefully. By evening, the weight of what was about to happen settled heavily in my chest. We sat together in my living room, the quiet filled with unspoken thoughts. I'm scared, she admitted softly. I took her hand. That's okay. Courage doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you do it anyway. She squeezed my hand, drawing strength from the moment. At 6:30 we drove toward the warehouse. Police waited nearby in unmarked cars, ready to move if anything went wrong. Roger and I stayed across the street, watching the building while she went inside, the tiny recording device hidden beneath her shirt. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure I could hear it echoing in the car. Minutes felt like hours. Then the headlights appeared. The silver sedan pulled into the lot. My breath caught. He stepped out of the car. And she was with him. They walked toward the door, completely unaware that the truth was about to catch up with them. Through the small receiver in my ear I heard footsteps, the creak of the door opening, then voices. Willa, he said, confusion in his tone. I know everything, she replied, her voice steady despite the fear I knew she must feel. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then the sound of movement. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice sharper now. I know she's alive, she said. I know you lied. Another pause. Then the truth began to spill out. For a moment all I could hear was my own breathing. Then his voice came through the receiver again, tight and controlled. You shouldn't be here, he said. I lived here for 7 years, my daughter replied, her voice steady in a way that made my chest ache with pride and fear all at once. I think I have every right to be here. A chair scraped across the concrete floor. You don't understand, he said, his tone shifting into something defensive. Everything I did was to protect you. Protect me, she repeated quietly. You made me believe I ruined someone's life. You let my family believe I was dead. Silence stretched for a few seconds, thick and heavy. Then another voice, the woman's, calm, almost cold. We did what we had to do. My hands tightened into fists. What does that mean? My daughter asked. It means your mother had money, the woman said matter-of-factly. And you were the easiest way to get it. The words felt like a punch to the chest. 7 years of grief reduced to a transaction. You lied to me, my daughter said, her voice trembling now despite her strength. You kept me here for money? You believed what you wanted to believe, he replied. You were scared. It made things easier. I felt Roger's hand on my shoulder, steadying me as anger surged through my veins. How much? My daughter asked quietly. 280,000, the woman answered without hesitation. And it was worth it. For a moment no one spoke. Then my daughter's voice came again, stronger now. You stole my life. It wasn't personal, he said. It was just business. Those words were the final confirmation. Roger leaned toward his radio. That's enough. The car doors around us flew open as officers moved quickly toward the building. I was out of my seat before I realized I had moved, my heart pounding as we rushed toward the entrance. Inside, the scene unfolded in a blur of movement and shouting. Police voices filled the warehouse, firm and commanding. He froze, shock flashing across his face as officers surrounded him. The woman raised her hands slowly, her expression unreadable. My daughter stood in the center of it all, trembling but standing tall. I crossed the room and pulled her into my arms as tears streamed down both our faces. It's over, I whispered. You're safe. Her body shook as she clung to me. I thought it would never end. Officers escorted them away, their protests fading into the distance as the warehouse grew quiet again. 7 years of fear ended in a single moment. Outside, the night air felt different, lighter somehow, like a storm had finally passed. The following weeks were filled with statements, court dates, and long conversations that helped piece together the truth. The investigation uncovered everything. The lies, the manipulation, the stolen money. The evidence was overwhelming. At the trial, I listened as the story unfolded in a courtroom instead of a warehouse. The recordings played clearly, their own words sealing their fate. The verdict came quickly. Guilty. Justice didn't feel loud or dramatic. It felt quiet, like a deep breath after holding it for far too long. Life didn't magically return to normal after that. Healing never works that way. But slowly, piece by piece, we began rebuilding. My daughter moved into a small apartment not far from my house. She started therapy, learning how to live in a world that felt unfamiliar after so many years of isolation. Some days were harder than others, but each step forward felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen. My granddaughter adjusted in her own way, cautious at first, then curious, then slowly opening her heart to the mother she was finally getting to know. The first time she called her mom, my daughter cried for an hour afterward. I did too. The house didn't feel so quiet anymore. Laughter slowly found its way back into rooms that had known too much silence. Sunday dinners became our new tradition, simple meals filled with stories, memories, and the kind of comfort that only comes from being together. One afternoon, months later, we visited my husband's grave together. My daughter knelt quietly, placing flowers beside the stone, her fingers tracing the letters of his name. "I'm home," she whispered. The breeze moved gently through the trees, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settle deep inside my chest. Not because everything was perfect, but because we had found our way back to each other. Life has a strange way of teaching us lessons we never asked to learn. I spent 7 years believing I understood loss. I thought grief was the hardest thing a person could carry. But I learned that truth, no matter how painful, is what sets us free. Forgiveness didn't happen overnight. Some wounds take time. Some scars never fully fade. But I chose to focus on what we still had instead of what we lost. A second chance. A family rebuilt. And the quiet understanding that even after the darkest storms, light finds a way back in. Now, when I sit at the kitchen table with my daughter and granddaughter laughing nearby, I sometimes think about how close we came to losing everything. And I hold those moments a little tighter. Because the greatest gift life gave me wasn't justice. It was getting my daughter back.